Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to another one of our People First talks. For those of you who are new to this space, just a little bit about the People First community. So we are a community of individuals and actors, more than 1,200 now, from across sectors and all around the world who believe that if we want to achieve sustainable development, we have to invest in people, particularly local leaders, and particularly investing in this idea of collective leadership, that we all need to be working together for the change that we want to see. And every month, we gather with people from our community to learn from them around what's the leadership we need and how do we develop it. And so today we have two special guests with us, Diego Ontaneda and Luisa Villanova. They are from the Latin American Leadership Academy, which is a movement that's reimagining how we find and grow a new generation of change makers across Latin America and beyond. And I'll let them share more about this work. I'm also excited that Luisa is here with us because she herself has been through this program. And since then, she's done some incredible things. She founded an organization that's reduced school dropout rates, reaching, tens of thousands of children across 19 states in Brazil and 7 other countries. She just became a Rhodes Scholar. So I'm really excited to also have her in the conversation so we can learn together with her as well. With that, we're just going to get into the conversation. I'll kick us off, ask a few questions, and then, like always, we want this to be a conversation. So please come in with your questions in the chat, and I'll create space at the end for more dialogue. So Diego and Luisa, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Let us start with you, Diego. Maybe I can just get you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about LALA, the Latin American Leadership Academy, why you formed it, what it does. Just bring us into that.
Thank you, Radha, Moses, and great to see you all. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever in the world you are. Excited to be here and have the conversation. So Lala, when I think about its origins, I go back to growing up in Peru, a country with huge inequalities where most young people, unfortunately, never get a chance to reach their full potential. Public schools are terrible, and racism, sexism, classism are widespread. In that context, I feel like I grew up very privileged. My parents really prioritized my education. And even when their business went under, we lost a house, then I got lucky. I got scholarships, was able to keep going to some of the best private schools in Peru. Then I got a full scholarship in the US. And then opportunities just kept coming my way. And I feel like I've been able to do what I've wanted with my life. All of this privilege and luck created a sense of like moral responsibility in me. It just didn't feel right to use all of that for my own benefit. So I've always thought about how to use all of these things for something beyond myself. This took me from being a fancy consultant at McKinsey in San Francisco to working at African Leadership Academy in Johannesburg, and eventually to starting Lala. I think of Lala as trying to do two big things. First, at a very human micro level, it aims to make stories like mine happen systematically and at scale, and not just to the privileged and the lucky few. And second, it aims to develop these young people into a movement of leaders grounded in integrity, guided by purpose, and equipped to drive lasting change for the common good, so that together we can transform systems. How we do it, in short, first we do a continental search and selection process that aims to find purpose-driven, promising young people aged 14 to 20, most of whom come from disadvantaged backgrounds. We think this is important because then they're most proximate to the most pressing problems that the region faces. Selected applicants then join Lala through a 1-week leadership bootcamp. We do them both in person and online, in English, Portuguese, and in Spanish. After the 1 week, we call them la líderes. They become la líderes for life. As la líderes, they get access to a beautiful and supportive lifelong community of people who share a larger purpose. All of them get a weekly curation of opportunities and resources. They also get access to special opportunities at partner organizations. So we're actively trying to build bridges to organizations that focus on a different part of the puzzle. And then they can apply to follow-on programs that we run in-house. The main ones are a mentorship program where we make tailor-made matches, ideally to the right mentor for the right moment in the journey. University placement, where we help low-income students apply for universities and full scholarships. We started an emotional education program where we help Lalieres develop the skills to build their emotional and mental well-being and resilience. And we're relaunching a careers program that was put on pause during the pandemic, where we help them access the labor force. We're also excited to build vertical tracks. These are sub-communities that aim to provide more intentional development opportunities and connections around areas of particular interest. Right now, the biggest one is on sustainability. And finally, as La Líderes grow and they advance on their leadership journeys, Lala will evolve with them so that we can keep supporting them on their leadership journeys until they actually reach their full potential and get to positions of influence from which they can make a real difference. Thank you.
Amazing. That's such a helpful way of just understanding the bigger picture. And now, Louisa, from the other side, you've participated in one of these programs. So can you walk us through your journey and to help us understand how this is, your own journey and just a little bit of how this has begun to grow your leadership?
For sure. No, thank you so much, everyone, for having me today. I'm really, really, really excited to be here and to share a little bit of how Lala has completely changed my life in a lot of ways. And I feel like sometimes we can be a little skeptical of being like, oh, what is that program that they're talking about? So I'm here to kind of like be this like show, don't tell type of situation. But sharing a little bit about my background, I grew up in rural Brazil. So if you look at the map of Brazil, I'm right in the heart of the country. So for me, I was also growing up with this idea that Diego brought up of how education was important. My parents like come from a really humble beginnings and all of that. And I always had this idea that education was this really awesome thing that I couldn't necessarily picture what it looked like. And I think they taught me that even without themselves knowing what education could do for our lives. But I always had that inside of me. So I was able to be a good student. And because of that, I had a lot of really great opportunities when it came to like access that I ended up having. And in one of those like schools that I went to with a scholarship, I started thinking a lot about like, okay, so what exists out there? And I started seeing a lot of my friends who weren't really great students or anything like that doing like exchange programs. And I was like, oh, if they can do exchange programs and I'm working so hard in school, maybe I can do something similar. And I remember typing in on Google being like, oh, what are like summer programs or stuff like that. And then in one of those research, Lala came up and ended up appearing in my life. I went to a boot camp back in 2018, which is what a lot of years ago, when I was 16. And it was really life changing in a lot of ways. And I think the way that I think about it is that there is a Louisa before Lala and a Louisa after Lala. Because I always wanted to do something, but I didn't know how to channel my energy. And I remember that one of the facilitators of the program told me that I had to learn how to channel that energy because I had a lot of energy, but I didn't know exactly how to channel it. And I think a lot about that even nowadays. And there were a lot of lessons that I learned in my boot camp that were really, really important. I think the main concrete lesson that came out of my boot camp was just like how can you actually do something for your community? Because I feel like a lot of us, especially when we are young, have this really great idea that we want to put into practice, but we don't know exactly how. And at that time, I was already working with some like public schools in my community to make sure that they had access to social emotional learning skills that I thought were really important because I had suffered bullying when I was younger and I really wanted to prevent bullying from happening. And then when I went to my boot camp at Lala, I started thinking about that idea in a much more strategic and thoughtful way of like, okay, why is this important to me? What is the type of result that I want to achieve? How do I bring people together? And I feel like at Lala, it was the first time that I realized that my talent wasn't math or something really like singing or like anything around those lines, but it could be organizing and like mobilizing people around an idea. And it gave me a community that was really important.
And Luisa, so, and walk us through, was there specific things that happened in that boot camp? Because a week is not too long a time, and it sounds like you had a big transformation there. Were there particular moments or things that were designed? Was it about the community or something someone said? Yeah.
Sí.
I think it was a mix of both things, actually. It was
¿Tienen bolsa? Te la doy una bolsa y tú la
concrete
pruebas.
lectures.
Sorry, hang on 1 second. We're just going to make sure everyone's on mute. Yeah, okay. So
Don't
we
worry.
can hear you.
I think it was a mix of both, actually, because it was the lectures that we were having. So I learned about this idea of like, how do you tell your story? This story of you, the story of us, and the story of now. That was something that I feel like I carry with me a lot. And how you were able to bring people together and like make sure that everyone understands why what you're talking about is important and matter. But also the conversations that I had outside of the classroom. So I remember this really concrete example of how that happened. And I was, like I mentioned, I was like leading this organization that was like doing a lot of already like some community organizing. But then I met this other person that had a like NGO that was impacting like other states. And I was like, oh my God, can you do that? How did you do that? And he told me, well, I created this Google form I can share with you. And then I like started spreading on WhatsApp groups and like on social media. And then I found young people that were able to implement it. And I was like, oh, really? You can do that? And then from then on, like I started also like expanding my own organization. So I do think that having examples and peers that did something similar was really influential and instrumental for that transformation for me.
Yeah, I love that. It's like the sense that it's kind of possible, and then the practical seeing, oh wait, someone like me has done something. And then maybe one more question for you, because oftentimes we do these leadership programs. How old were you when you did that
I
program?
was 16.
16. Okay, so you're 16 years old, you're there for a week, you have this like big moment. And what Diego shared was it's not just about the week, it's about all the years after and the support that you get. So tell us what you've been up to since then, and then how is being part of this community supported? In what ways has it continued to grow your leadership?
That's a great question. And it's something that I think a lot really often because Diego recently gave me the title of Chief of Staff at Lala, which means that I can give my opinion on anything that I'm thinking about. I'm like, Diego, I think we should do this. So I wear that brand with a lot of pride. And I think that for me, the way that Lala as a whole has continued to exist in my life is that there was a program after my boot camp that I applied to that we all like lived in Colombia for a month and we continued to explore different topics. That program was reshaped after the pandemic, but I think I also had that experience that kept me going and kept me really connected to the organization. And there's also the social aspect of what the community means to me. So all of my best friends, most of them, are people that have some connection with Lala, either that I met at my boot camp and that I kept really close touch with, or people that I ended up going to the second program with, or that went through their own boot camp. And I might not have met them during that time, but I ended up meeting them later on at a different space. And I also think that Lala does a really essential work in making sure that they are connecting students with opportunities that go beyond the community. So Lala had a really instrumental role when I was applying to college, for example. So they provided a lot of support, and they now have a specific program that allows other students that most often come from really low income backgrounds that otherwise would not have that support to apply to colleges abroad. And that was really important for me. And I'm really happy to also have like mentors in the community that I really, really admire. So I think there are a lot of different ways in which that community keeps me going. And I think having a lot of thought partners in it is also really, really key.
Yeah, what I'm hearing is a lot of just exposure. So to exposure to
Mhm.
opportunities you might not have had exposure to peers who are doing things in different spaces, and exposure to just discovering your own full potential. So maybe with that, Diego, let me pass it back to you. And this People First series, is really around looking at like, what does it actually take to grow leadership and what is the type of leadership that we need? So what are some of your biggest insights on doing this work for many years? How do you think about the leadership that needs to be cultivated? And, what's your philosophy around what it takes to develop that?
Sure thing. And Lisa, it's always a pleasure to reconnect and hear how your story keeps evolving. So Radha, some of the insights, I think particularly as I think of where Lala fits in the larger People First community, I'll try to focus on some of those insights. So first, if we want to develop a whole generation of proximate leaders, we have to start young. If we find a promising youth from a difficult background when they're 15, we can dramatically change their life trajectory. That same person, just a few years later, might be locked out of way too many opportunities. Also, those teenage years are crucial. That's when most of us form our sense of identity, our mindsets, our views of the world, and our place in it. That's when people are choosing what they're going to study for the next 4 or 5, 6 years, depending what career or country, and more. So that's a particular window of opportunity when we can really move the needle. Second, potential comes in all shapes and sizes. Luisa spoke a little bit about this in her case. Some of our most impressive young leaders actually had bad grades in school, not just mediocre, but bad. When I look at many elite educational institutions, I see many of them setting a really high bar on academics, on past achievement. And I see this as a very rational way to try to minimize the risk of false positives. False positives here being admitting someone that you shouldn't have. So they're trying to minimize that risk because it's a very visible, embarrassing risk, right? But in our experience, doing that increases the risk of false negatives, meaning rejecting someone that you shouldn't have rejected. And the tricky thing about that is that no one holds these institutions accountable for the incredible people that they rejected that they shouldn't have rejected. There's just no data on this. So it's on us to take that responsibility to make sure that we're looking out not just for the ones we admit, but also for the ones we reject. So at Lala, we strive to be holistic and contextual in how we evaluate applicants. And applicants can reapply as many times as they want between ages 14 and 20. And there's 2 applications per year, so they can apply as many times as they want. And we actually take particular pride whenever we meet a leader who got in the second time around, the third time around. I've seen at one bootcamp a standing ovation for one girl that shared with a little bit of shame that she got in the third time around. And it was just a moment of celebrating her tenacity and her resilience.
Diego, tell us a little bit about, because that is counter to a lot of what people think. They say, no, we're efficient, we're going to do it one time around. Tell us why you do that. And, in some ways, and do you do anything to support people in their leadership through the process?
Yeah. So I think it comes down to having clarity of what is the ultimate purpose of your organization really, and how do you fight for that? So I told you that at a human level, allowing us to make stories like mine happen, not just to the lucky and the privileged. So there's embedded in that a particular emphasis on people with less advantage in life. And it's pretty clear that given the lack of formal elite educational opportunities, mentorship, and so on, their essays might not be as polished, their interview skills might not be as sharp, and so on. So one is, if that's the kind of people that you're trying to find and develop and give a real chance, then you have to do some extra work yourself and not just expect all of them to meet you where you are, right? Like, you have to do the work of meeting them where they are. So that's one part. At the macro level, if we're ultimately in the business of fighting for the common good at scale, most problems are concentrated in particular geographies, in particular communities, among particular identity groups. Those problems are not going to be solved at scale sustainably by people who mostly look like me. So we need to do the work of finding those proximate leaders and equipping them to solve the problems that they've seen close up, that they've often lived themselves. So whether it's about helping the person or about solving the larger societal problems, we have to do that extra work. So there's a little bit of an imperative that is part of the theory of change that is essential to create the impact you want to have ultimately, if that is what your institution is about. If your institution is about prestige and success and having the richest possible alumni network, you're in another business. But I think for this audience and this community, I think I'm preaching to the choir here. And part of what really convinced us to give these many opportunities was in our second bootcamp in December 2017, we had this girl from Chocó in Colombia who interviewed terribly, and we rejected her. And a mentor of hers came to us and he was like, guys, I don't know what happened. You have to give her a second chance. Only because we trusted him, we gave her a second chance. She completely bombed that second interview as well. We told him, hey, sorry, she's not it. She doesn't have it. He twisted our arms, bullied us until we gave her a third chance. On that third interview, something finally clicked. She relaxed. Her real self shone through. She blew us away. She's now one of our most famous, celebrated La Líderes. And we almost rejected her, and not just once and not just twice. So fortunately, we had that humility sandwich real early to learn that even as enlightened as we might think we are, and as aware as we might be of biases and so on, we can still make mistakes, and therefore it's important to do the extra work of making the partnerships where a feeder partner, a mentor, can help bridge the information asymmetries that are out there, giving people multiple application opportunities, even making the application process itself be value additive, so that we're not just taking people's time, but using questions, reflection prompts that help them grow, even if they don't end up joining us. So that's a little bit of how we think about the application process.
Yeah, no, wonderful, Diego. That shows both the humility to learn as we go along, but also, we're talking about enabling leadership. It's also sharing what are the structural things that we might need to put in place. And oftentimes that requires challenging the way things have always been done. So I love that you're challenging the way things have always been done. And just one more follow-up question here. When we spoke previously, you said so much of the model is also around growing leadership within the community. So we've got Louisa here who has gone out and done things in the world, but actually the majority of people, what I understood from you, actually stay within their communities and exercise leadership in their communities. Can you share more on that, the choice that led to that, but also, what are you seeing that's possible and how you're supporting that?
Yeah, happy to. So because we're in the business of developing leaders, unlocking their agency is key. So they have to learn how to take ownership of their growth and their journeys. Many educational institutions instead focus on how do we pour the right content, the right knowledge in their heads, and how do we craft the right educational experiences for our students within our walls. But the kinds of leaders that we want to develop have to be out there in the world facing real complex problems and getting actual things done. So we think more about how do we set the conditions that allow our young leaders to take the wheel, to take real action in the world, to develop the habits of reflection that will help them squeeze out more learning out of those experiences, and how to build a kind of community and mentorship relationships that will accelerate their learning. Like Luisa mentioned, and let's just use Luisa, because Luisa had been doing things in her community before she went to college. And Luisa also mentioned how her connections to the community, here meaning just other La Líderes, influence how she thought about her journey, how she made hard decisions, how she even shaped organizational strategy and operating decisions. And Luisa also mentioned having mentors. So think about real action to address real problems in the world in the context of having community, peers, mentors, and so on. So a little bit of how we do this. We take La Líderes out of their community for at most 1 week. If they're doing the virtual version of the bootcamp, they don't even leave their community, they're right there. So they're still embedded in their community, in the problems that they've seen, the things they care about, and they're getting access to some different insights, skills, perspectives, mindsets, worldviews that can help them look at their community with a different set of eyes. I remember another leader, she told me that when she came back to her community, she was from a favela in Rio. She was like, Diego, 1 week has passed, my community has the same problems. My family has the same problems that it had a week ago, but now I'm looking at everything with a different set of eyes. During the bootcamp, we also try to plant some seeds that will increase the chances that they will take real action in their community. So that's a combination of a mix of social innovation and entrepreneurial skills. Things like, hey, you don't have to be the person with all the answers. You can strive to be a problem understander. You can just go and listen and observe. Don't try to solve the problem by yourself. Don't try to come as a hero and dump your solution on your beneficiaries. Aim to co-create. Don't just see problems in the world. Also try to find points of strength or beauty, or find allies you can build with. It's okay to fail. Failure is actually part of the process. Aim to iterate, to prototype, to experiment. So these little ideas and a few others, plus the community and the role models and the mentors and so on, dramatically increase the chances that once they're in the community, they will say, hey, there's probably something I can do right now. I don't need to be 50 years old. I don't need to be rich. I don't need to have all the degrees in the world. And this action doesn't just accelerate their development dramatically. Compare this with project-based learning that so many schools and universities are all about. There you have an artificial project in an artificial setting guided by a teacher or professor. here you have a la líder in their real community, working to address real problems that they care about, learning how to hire, to build teams, to fundraise, to sell, to organize, and they're being guided by other la líderes and by mentors, some of whom are successful social entrepreneurs, for example. It's much more scalable, much more authentic, much more cost effective, and it helps reinforce this new sense of identity that they're already starting to develop. I don't know if you remember Fred's talk about how formative that experience was when he was 18 years old and started the school with his mom and so on. We're doing that at scale, and this new identity then sticks for much, much longer. And we think that dramatically increases the chances they will continue to do this the rest of their lives. So far, there's more than 500 of these ventures all over Latin America, started by La Líderes. So it is working, and it's pretty impressive.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask Luisa one last question, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So I see one in the chat already. If you have questions, I will open it up in just a moment. But Luisa, final question for you. So you walked us through the beginning of your journey. So, you went through this boot camp. It actually changed your mindsets. You built a sense of community. Like Diego was saying, you started to see things were possible. What have you been up to since then? I know you've had tremendous impact building your own organization. And can you share a little bit more about that? And again, is there one or two things that opened up in your leadership that wouldn't have been possible without this community? And then I'll go to the questions in the chat.
For sure. I think thinking about starting from the end, the things that would not be possible. So Diego described that I was already doing some work in my community before my boot camp. So that ended up growing and expanding. And by 2019, we had already impacted 9,000 students. And that was only possible because I found people, many of them, other people who went through the program at Lala, they were able not only to become volunteers and join the team, but ended up later on becoming the leaders of the organizations when I decided to pass the baton. So we had two different people who were Lala alum to lead the organization. So that was one way in which I think Lala was extremely influential, because without them, I would probably not be able to continue that work when I decided to have a more strategy and like board kind of role in my first NGO. So that was like one thing. What I ended up doing since I went to college, so I graduated last year in May in political science and education. And during that time, I feel like it became even clearer for me how much education was the single thing that allowed me to have such a different future than other people in my community. And I feel like that really cemented my commitment to education. And the way that I realized that was also like feeling that I did not belong at all into that space, because I was going to a really traditional university in the US, and that was really a challenging experience in a lot of ways, because I didn't find my community, and this community that had a Lala actually with other young people who were going through a similar process, many of them at different universities, but also like a lot of times being the first of their family to go to college, coming from low-income backgrounds too. So I really started reflecting on that and having people to confide in. That was really, really essential. So I think that's the second way in which Lala and the community of Lala really helped me throughout the process. And then my second year of college, I started realizing that the reason why I was there is so many other people who grew up with me were not. It wasn't because I was this like crazy genius that had so much talent, like far from that. It was a mix of people that believed in me, like so many in the Lala community, and the opportunities that I had access to. So if it wasn't for a scholarship that Lala gave me, I probably wouldn't have been able to go to the boot camp. So I really had this like epiphany moment in which I was like, okay, I need to do something to explain why my story is the exception and not the rule, and how we can make sure that stories like mine are not an isolated case. So that led me to start working in school dropout rates and the prevention of that. And I created this second organization that I currently work on that is called Tocando em Frente, which means moving ahead, where we created this like prevented and play center and community center program in which we implement in public schools with middle schoolers all across Brazil's countryside. And we aim to make sure that they understand why they're in school and connecting them to other systems that allow them to continue in school. And now I'm doing a master's in education. So that's kind of the idea right now. And my thesis will be testing the intervention that we are launching at Tocando now. So that's kind of where I am right now.
No, well, it's incredible to hear when you invest in people at an early age already. You've built an organization that's solving a real challenge in the world, growing your capabilities. And yeah, I think we can all learn from that. It's inspiring to hear. Let me turn it over to Wendy, if you don't mind coming off mute and sharing your couple of questions. And then others, raise your hand or just put your question in the chat and we'll get to you next.
Thank you so much, both of you. This is super inspiring. I'm just curious if you feel like you've learned things along the way about how to develop agency or the other kind of characteristics that you've found to be key for leadership, or maybe it's just agency, or I don't know how you think about that, but whether you've discovered ways of doing that we could actually integrate within schools. Like, how much of this do you feel like is important that it's, I mean, clearly there's so much about the networks and the approach and certain things you're doing that are kind of necessarily outside of schools, but just curious if you're discovering approaches that you think could be integrated into the school day.
So Wendy, when I read your question, some of the first pieces that came to mind are that, well, first maybe part of the problem is that schools are beating out all authenticity out of students. Like their students are not learning because of curiosity or joy or because of some larger purpose. They're learning to the test, then to the standardized tests. Then they're doing all these curriculars to build like golden resume so that they can then get into university, ideally with the right scholarship, and then the same thing repeats. And I remember you've written about this a few months ago. And then they get sucked into that rat race, and then it's about the prestigious job. I don't know. I honestly don't know how to solve all of that puzzle at the school level alone if universities and then the labor markets employers don't come on board. Because what I was first going to tell you is, well, it's about like helping students find their authentic journey, help them connect to a purpose beyond themselves, really connect to a sense of service. We need to connect them to more accessible role models, maybe for younger role models or role models that look like them or have similar backgrounds to them, and not just the sage on the stage. And then we need to help students take real action in the world, and they're going to start learning what they can do through action and reflection. And then we can help them redefine failure so they can see that it's okay, that it's part of the process, that it doesn't shape them, and so on. And then through all of these things, we start fostering a growth mindset and nurture their curiosity, help them really find the things that they really care about intrinsically, and help them learn that it can be joyful to learn. Like, again, schools beat that out of so many students, and we forget that learning can be joyful. So I was gonna tell you all that, but I honestly don't know if that is right now a smart strategic move for most students in most schools of the world, because if those kids then end up having worse grades because they did all the passion service thing, and then they don't get into a university or don't get into a good enough university or don't get the scholarship they need, then it backfired. Or if they try to do this same thing in college, but then they are not able to get the jobs that they want, then it backfires. So that's why we try to not just think about the students, but also over time find the right university partners, and then, like I mentioned, this careers program that we're trying to create. We think we need to create a marketplace of employers, both private sector, social sector, maybe eventually public sector as well, that are willing to look beyond the percentile, the grade, the GPA, and so on, and say, hey, I understand that character is more important, that resilience, that curiosity, that ownership, an entrepreneurial spirit, that these things are more important, that these things are not don't show up in the grades. But yeah, I worry that just schools, particularly schools that work with students from less privileged backgrounds who might not have the family connections, the name, just the family money to back them up, that it can be risky. So I know how to do it at a relative scale with Lala, because one of the things we can do is we can give them the Lala stamp, and we can try to make the Lala stamp mean something, so that even if they came from a public school, even if they have the most amazing grades, we can help bridge those gaps. I don't yet know how to do it for all kids across all schools. I don't know. Maybe Lisa knows.
Yeah, Louise, I was gonna ask you, do you have any thoughts? If there's things that you got from this that you would want to see in every school, since you've had different experiences, what are your thoughts? And Diego, I hear you saying it's really systemic. But Louise, I'm also curious your thoughts.
No, yeah, for sure. And I feel like that's a interesting perspective, Diego. Maybe I'm more optimistic than you. But I think there are some things that I feel like at least at Tocando, because we do work with the schools that you're describing of like that are in the countryside community that don't have the teachers a lot of times. So we are the ones who are kind of like coming in when the math teacher doesn't show up. So I have this like 18-year-old teaching the curriculum. So I do think that interventions that are similar to Lala and create this third space are really important. But at the same time, I do think that schools themselves are really, really essential. And just like from the data that I look at, but also like from a personal standpoint, like I see that the simple fact that I stayed in school had a lot of was like mainly one of the reasons why I think a lot of the things happen in my life. So thinking a lot about that, I feel like there are two things that I reflect a lot on and that at Tocando we really try to push for. That is what you brought up about the role models. I do think that we are able to maybe in a different extent mimic that and make sure that a lot of that coming from teachers especially is mimicked. So I feel like for me, when I think about what were the most important moments in my like educational journey, were moments in which teachers came to me and were like, "Oh, like what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was like, "Oh, I never thought about that. Like, what do I want to do?" And just like having someone who believes in you before you believe in yourself is really essential. And I think that that's what school is for a lot of times. It's hard because like you have teachers that are overworked under stress, but I do think that more of the systemic portion of it can come from school environments if a lot of changes happen within those systems to ensure that teachers also see that aspect as part of their main role. I feel like that's one of the things. And the other thing is like making sure that we're creating incentives that allow for those opportunities to be more within reach. Because if you think about it, any student in Brazil can apply to Lala, but they don't know that Lala exists. And I feel like that's the most important jump. And that's why I think like talking about Brazil, like almost everyone is in school. The school isn't great a lot of times, or they don't have access to different things. But at the same time, I feel like just creating that bridge, and that we call inside Tocando like the inspirational gap, we can already fix a lot of problems. So that's for me like is the path forward. And I don't know, maybe the optimistic in me, but I definitely think that schools are the way to go. And then that's probably why policy is also really important in that sense.
Well, I love your optimism, and it's a testament to the program that we actually recognize that I think so much of the optimism and hope comes from our young people. So thank you for sharing your ideas. Other people have questions. Yeah, we've got a couple more moments for questions, thoughts, reflections.
I could ask another one.
Go for it.
Although, please, everyone else, come in.
Yeah.
I actually thought, Diego, also, I mean, I appreciated both your responses to the previous question, and I thought that your explication of all the different elements of what it takes to foster agency was super helpful. I'm wondering, and maybe you said this earlier, but I missed it if so, like when you think about what you're trying to develop, like how you're defining kind of the sort of mindsets or the competencies that you're trying to develop through this, agency is clearly one of them. Are there other dimensions that you've defined? And I guess I'm curious in particular whether a sense of like commitment to improving the collective welfare in some way, I don't know how you would articulate that, but is part of it. Like, are you trying to, we're thinking a lot about how do we shift the orientation of, say, our education systems from one that's focused on individual achievement towards one that's focused on both individual and collective welfare. And I'm wondering how you've thought about that.
Pessimistic piece and then make it optimistic. So my pessimistic piece is that I don't know how to take people who have no sense of purpose, who don't care about other people, who are just selfish, who are not curious. I don't know how to take people like that at scale and tell you, hey, I've built this machine that systematically turns those people into purposeful, service-oriented people. I don't know how to do that. So Lala focuses instead on finding people who already demonstrate seeds of a vocation for service, of kindness, altruism, generosity, kindness, humility, a bias for action, even if it's the smallest action. We have kids that we admitted just because of what they did for grandma during the pandemic, right? Like it wasn't the great social enterprise, but it showed some of these character attributes that we're looking for. Integrity, I guess, just some sense of a moral compass that is important to them. So we first try to find people who are showing seeds of these things, and then part of our philosophy, or one of a driving belief, is that if you believe many of the findings of the science of happiness, the happiest, most flourishing version of these people is one where they're able to stay true to this sense of identity and purpose, where they can be in service of others, where they can build a life with purpose, with meaning, and where they can build genuine, authentic relationships around values and purpose and service and impact and so on. And yet, we mostly don't see people like these out in the world as adults. Right? Like there's something that is happening along the journey that takes these people out of this path. So part of how we think about it at Lala is we need to understand what are those biggest obstacles that these people are facing along their journeys that are taking them out of this path of service, of meaning, of purpose, and of authenticity to themselves. And then we aim to be super, super tactical about how do we help the right leader overcome the obstacle that they're facing in their particular journey at the right moment in time. That way, it's also a solution that can scale cost effectively, because you're you're super targeting your interventions. So some of the biggest obstacles that we've seen, financial barriers are enormous, whether it's to access university or to take care of your family and yourself. And maybe later on you want to start something, whether it's a business or a social enterprise, you just don't have the funds. So financial barriers are enormous. Access to the right educational opportunities, brands, networks, also a big barrier. Social emotional skills that schools, universities, the workplace often don't teach, and that, as I think we all know how important this is, whether it's to work with others or to take care of yourself, to deal with your own psychology, your inner critic, to deal and to take care of yourself so you're not just burning yourself out along the way. Social capital is an enormous barrier. Access to role models, people who believe in you. And I think a big one that, I mean, I think it's a big systemic problem is societal and familiar and your family's pressures and expectations. I think it's a very silent, insidious one that keeps a lot of people from staying true to themselves and fighting for a life of impact, of purpose, that I think is critical for agency to really emerge and be preserved. So I don't know if that answers the larger question. I know you're thinking at very large scale, all over the world, every child. But this is how we try to approach it. And maybe the hopeful news about our work is that while we are very selective about these character and purpose traits that we're looking for, we know that those character and purpose traits emerge everywhere, in every geography, in every background. So I think that is one message that I hope people will take away from this, that it's a cliche that, you know, potential or talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. I want people to understand that there's a potential Wendy Cobb out there. Right? Like, it's not just that there's a potential accountant who right now is a janitor. We're talking about Wendy Cobb level talent and leaders out there that are right now in some public school in the mountains of Peru. And if we find them when they're 16, we can change their life and maybe we'll have another Wendy Cobb. If 5 years go by, we might never hear this kid's story. And that's part of where our urgency to do this work comes from, that we don't hear enough public outcries that we're losing this kind of talent. I don't know, that's a little bit of what we're fighting for. Thanks for the questions, Wendy.
Wonderful. And Luisa, you're just such a good example of what Diego is talking about. There's, you know, thousands of folks like you out there. And so really, really inspiring to hear that. We have one more question in the chat, and it was just, are there spaces to collaborate? So I feel like there's so many different movements. So in the Teach for All network, there's the Enseñas that are around, having young people going and spending 2 years in classrooms. There's, you know, what you're doing is connecting people with opportunities. So Diego, if there's places you see we can collaborate, even just beyond your organization, do share those and we can make that available in the follow-up note as well.
Totally. So when we think about partnerships, we think about the student journey and which organizations come before us, and they are our feeder partners, and we are an opportunity partner for their students. And then we see ourselves as feeder partners to organizations that come after, and they are our opportunity partners. So we've already partnered with some Enseñas. Enseña Peru has been outstanding. because the enseñas have this incredible network of educators in every part of the educational landscape, but particularly the fellows that are in the classroom, they might be the person that spots a young person like Luisa, and they might not know what to do with that potential. If they know that LAL exists, that UW exists, and so on, they can make that bridge. Then other Enseña alumni that are in the public sector and so on can partner with us to do what Luisa said. How do we help every student know that this opportunity exists, or that other opportunities? Again, it's not just LAO, right? Like there's East March in Brazil, there's Fundação Lemon, Fundação Estudar, there's Peru Champs, Innova Schools, there's others. It's not just about Lala. I think that the fabric that the teach-for-all network is building is really powerful for that. Then I think Lala hopefully very soon can already become a really exciting feeder partner for the teach-for-all network, because many líderes want to enter the education space. So becoming fellows in the teach-for-all network can be really exciting. And then as Lala scales, impact that Teach4All has already had is that you guys are a huge inspiration for how we can scale. Before, we wanted to run a continental network run centrally. We're now moving towards becoming a network of independent and interdependent Lalas at the country level, each of which does this. So Lala Brazil already exists. We're working towards setting up Lala Peru. Over time, we might grow further. So you've already had huge impact through inspiration. And perhaps your people can be part of helping other organizations scale. So Ale Mejia, part of Teach4All, is on my board co-chair. Aldo Valencia, who used to work at Enseña Peru and Teach4All, is now helping us enter Peru. So the talent that you guys have built can be, and the global network you've built can be incredibly powerful for other organizations like Lala, like Tocando Enfrente and others to fly a little bit easier after you guys have already broken all that wind resistance. So
well, wonderful.
A big thank you for what you guys have done and continue to do.
And I think this is just, I mean, you brought in so many of the other players, like African Leadership Academy, in this broader People First community. I think there's so many of us who, you said, ourselves have the seeds around there's a different way that's possible. So I think it's just inspiration for all of us to continue connecting with one another. And the biggest thing I'm taking away from this is, again, the power of young people. Louisa, I think you show us why it is important to invest in agency at a young age. Just with your optimism and your hope and what you've accomplished and how you've shown up, I think it's just a reminder that if we invest early, it can make a real difference. So that's one of the big things I'm taking away. Thank you so much, Diego and Luisa, and for all who joined us. We'll send out a summary of the talk and do share it with others who couldn't make it. And this is our last talk for the year, but be ready, we'll have a good lineup in January. So if there's any of you who have ideas for folks you want to learn from, do drop me a note. And a big thanks again, Diego and Luisa.